The first ships appeared in Earth's sky on a Tuesday morning in March of 2347. They came without warning, sliding out of the darkness between stars like shadows given form. Massive vessels, each one larger than a city, hung in the blue sky above every continent. For 6 hours, the world held its breath and waited. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the orbital station Prometheus, watching the alien fleet through the viewport. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. But she had never seen anything like this. How many ships? She asked, her voice steady despite the cold fear in her chest. 412, Admiral, her tactical officer replied. They're not responding to any communication attempts. Tanaka nodded slowly. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer. She wished it had been different. In Lagos, Nigeria, a 16-year-old girl named Kira Okonkwo was walking to school when the sky turned white. She looked up and saw fire falling from heaven. The beam of light struck the city center, and everything Kira had ever known simply ceased to exist. The shockwave threw her into a ditch beside the road. When she opened her eyes, Lagos was gone. In its place was a crater of melted glass and burning earth. Kira screamed for her mother, her father, her little brother. But there was no one left to answer. The beings called themselves the Voldari. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for 50,000 years, longer than humans had existed as a species. They were tall and thin, with skin like polished silver and eyes that held no warmth. To them, the universe was a garden, and they were the gardeners. Any weed that grew too fast had to be pulled. Humanity had grown very fast indeed. In just 300 years, they had gone from simple farmers to a spacefaring civilization. The Voldari had watched this with growing concern. Such rapid development was unnatural. Such a species could not be trusted. The Triumvirs, the three ancient rulers of the Voldari hegemony, made their decision. Earth would burn. Dr. Marcus Webb was deep underground in Antarctica when the attack began. He was a xenobiologist, though until that morning, his field had been entirely theoretical. His research station was hidden beneath 2 kilometers of ice, built to study extremophile bacteria. When the communications from the surface went dead, he and his team huddled around a radio and listened to the world end. The Voldari were thorough. They struck every major city, every military base, every industrial center. 3 billion people died in the first hour. Another billion died in the fires and chaos that followed. The survivors scattered like ants from a burning nest, fleeing to bunkers, to mountains, to anywhere the killing light had not reached. Admiral Tanaka fought back. Her small fleet of defense ships threw themselves at the alien armada, buying time for evacuation shuttles to lift off from the burning planet below. She watched her pilots die one by one, their ships swatted from the sky like insects. But they saved thousands of lives with their sacrifice, carrying refugees to the colonies on Mars and Titan. When it was over, Tanaka had 7 ships left out of 40. Earth was a smoking ruin. The oceans boiled in places where the Voldari beams had struck. The sky was choked with ash and dust that would block the sun for years. The Voldari commander broadcast a message to the survivors. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if destroying a civilization was simply another task to complete before lunch. The hegemony has judged humanity and found you wanting, he said. You reached too far, too fast. Now you will fade, as all lesser species fade. In 100 years, no one will remember you existed. Then the main fleet left. They left behind a small occupation force, barely a dozen ships, to watch humanity die. They did not expect to wait long. Kira was found 3 days later by a rescue team. She had walked 40 kilometers through the burning wasteland, drinking from puddles and eating whatever she could find. She did not speak for a week, after they found her. When she finally did, she asked only one question. How do we kill them? The rescue workers had no answer. But they took her to a shuttle bound for Titan, where the last free colony of humanity clung to life in the frozen darkness. Dr. Webb emerged from his bunker a month after the attack. The surface was unrecognizable. Antarctica, once a frozen desert, was now a wasteland of ice and fire. But his facility had survived, and more importantly, his team had survived. They had power, supplies, and most valuable of all, they had minds. On his first night above ground, Webb found a piece of wreckage from a Valdari drone. It was small, barely larger than his fist, but it was the first alien technology any human had ever held. He turned it over in his hands, studying the strange curves and unfamiliar materials. We need to understand them, he told his team. We need to learn how they think, how they build, how they fight. Because someday, we're going to fight back. His colleagues looked at him like he was mad. Earth was in ruins. Billions were dead. Humanity was scattered across the solar system, hiding in holes like rats. Fighting back seemed impossible, but Webb had spent his life studying life itself. He knew something the Valdari did not. Life was stubborn. Life adapted. Life found a way. Admiral Tanaka gathered her remaining ships in the asteroid belt, hidden among the rocks where Valdari sensors could not find them. She called her surviving officers together and looked at their faces, seeing the grief and rage and despair written there. They think we're finished, she said. They think we'll just lie down and die. They've never been more wrong. She pulled up a holographic display of the solar system. Red dots marked Valdari positions. Blue dots marked human survivors. There were so few blue dots. We're going to rebuild, Tanaka continued. Slowly, quietly. We're going to learn everything we can about our enemy. And when we're ready, when they've forgotten to fear us, we're going to make them remember. On Titan, in a cramped refugee shelter, Kira Okonkwo began her training as a pilot. She was the youngest in her class by 3 years. She was also the best. She flew like she had nothing to lose. Because she didn't. Everything she had ever loved was ash and memory. Her instructor asked her once why she pushed herself so hard. Because someday I'm going to fly over their worlds, she answered. And I'm going to show them what it feels like to burn. The Valdari occupation force settled into a comfortable routine. They monitored the solar system, occasionally destroying a human ship that strayed too close to their patrol routes. They sent regular reports to the hegemony, always saying the same thing. The humans were dying. It was only a matter of time. They did not notice the small ships moving between asteroids. They did not detect the hidden facilities growing beneath the ice of distant moons. They did not see humanity gathering its strength in the darkness. The Valdari had made a mistake. They had assumed that breaking humanity would be enough. They did not understand that humans were never more dangerous than when they were broken. They did not know that the ashes they had created were not the end of the story. They were the beginning. 12 years passed in the cold darkness of space. The Valdari barely noticed. 12 years was nothing to beings who lived for centuries. Their occupation force grew lazy and bored, running the same patrol routes day after day, year after year. They stopped watching so closely. They stopped caring. The humans were dying slowly, just as predicted. There was nothing to worry about. They were wrong. Deep in the asteroid belt, in a hollowed-out rock that the Valdari had never found, Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before a fleet of 47 warships. They were not beautiful ships. They were ugly things, built from asteroid iron and salvage parts, held together by determination and desperate hope. But they were human ships, built by human hands, and they carried human vengeance in their hearts. Tanaka was 65 years old now. Her hair was completely white, and her face was lined with the weight of 12 years of grief. but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had kept her fighting when all seemed lost. "Status report," she said. Her officers responded one by one. "Weapon systems ready. Engines at full power. Crews trained and eager." They had waited 12 long years for this moment. In Antarctica, Dr. Marcus Webb had transformed his hidden research station into something remarkable. Where there had once been a small team studying bacteria, there was now a sprawling underground complex filled with scientists from every field. They had spent 12 years taking apart every piece of Voldari technology they could find, learning its secrets, improving upon its designs. Webb stood before a holographic display showing the schematics of a Voldari shield generator. Next to it was a human design based on the same principles. The human version was smaller, more efficient, and twice as powerful. "The Voldari stopped innovating 10,000 years ago," Webb explained to his team. "They found solutions that worked and never looked for better ones. They've forgotten how to improve, how to adapt. We haven't." He pulled up another display, this one showing a new engine design. It was a fusion of Voldari faster-than-light principles and human engineering. Early tests suggested it could outrun anything in the galaxy. "They think they're the masters of the universe," Webb said. "But they're fossils, living relics of a dead age. And we're going to show them what happens when the future meets the past." Kira Okonkwo had grown into a woman during the Ember years. She was 28 now, tall and strong, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She had become the best pilot in the Resistance fleet, famous for flying missions that no one else would dare attempt. She sat in the cockpit of her small ship, watching a Voldari patrol cruiser drift past in the distance. Her mission was simple: slip past the patrol, pick up supplies from a hidden depot on Europa, and return without being detected. She had done it 100 times before, but today was different. Today, she had new orders. Her communication screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Tanaka's face. "Captain Okonkwo," Tanaka said. "Change of plans. We've detected a damaged Voldari scout ship near your position. One occupant, alive. I want you to capture it." Kira felt her heart beat faster. In 12 years, they had never captured a living Voldari. Every encounter had ended in death, usually theirs. But a live prisoner could answer questions. A live prisoner could reveal secrets. "Understood, Admiral," Kira said. "I'll bring you your alien." The capture was easier than expected. The Voldari officer was injured, his ship crippled by a collision with space debris. He was barely conscious when Kira dragged him from the wreckage. She looked down at his silver face, at the eyes that held nothing but contempt even in defeat, and felt the old rage burning in her chest. "You killed my family," she whispered. "You killed everyone I loved." The Voldari's lips curled into something like a smile. "We killed billions. You think your family matters? You think any of you matter? You're insects. You're nothing." Kira wanted to kill him then. Her hand moved toward her weapon. But she stopped herself. Dead, he was worthless. Alive, he was a weapon of a different kind. "We'll see," she said. Dr. Webb conducted the interrogation personally. He was not cruel about it, though many wanted him to be. He was simply patient. He asked questions. He listened to answers. He pieced together the truth like a puzzle, one small piece at a time. What he learned changed everything. "The hegemony is old," Webb reported to Tanaka. "Far older than we thought. And old things become brittle. The Voldari haven't fought a real war in 12,000 years. They've crushed rebellions, destroyed primitive species, but they haven't faced an enemy that could truly threaten them in longer than human civilization has existed." Tanaka leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they've forgotten how to fight. Their tactics are the same as they were 10,000 years ago. Their technology hasn't advanced in millennia. They've been so powerful for so long that they've become complacent. Webb paused. They can be beaten. The plan was bold, almost insane. They would strike the Valdari occupation force in a single coordinated assault, hitting every ship and every station at the same time. It would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Any mistake would mean death for everyone involved. Tanaka presented the plan to her fleet commanders. She expected arguments, objections, fear. Instead, she saw grim smiles and nodding heads. "We've been waiting 12 years for this," one commander said. "Let's make it count." The attack began at midnight, Earth time. Kira led the first wave, her squadron diving toward the Valdari command station in orbit around Mars. Behind her came 46 other ships, each with their own target, each with their own score to settle. The Valdari didn't understand what was happening at first. Their sensors showed human ships, but that was impossible. The humans had only a handful of vessels, old and weak. These ships were fast and powerful, moving in patterns that the Valdari had never seen before. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Kira's weapons tore through the command station's shields like paper. She watched the alien structure break apart, spilling bodies and debris into the void. She felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a cold, hard purpose. "This is for Lagos," she said quietly. "This is for everyone." The battle lasted 90 minutes. When it was over, every Valdari ship in the solar system had been destroyed. Not captured, not disabled, destroyed. Humanity was done taking prisoners. Admiral Tanaka broadcast a message to the galaxy, knowing that Valdari sensors would pick it up and relay it to the hegemony. "To the Valdari triumvirs," she said, "you burned our world and left us to die. You thought we were finished. You were wrong. We have not forgotten. We have not forgiven. And we are coming for you." In the great council chamber of the hegemony, the triumvirs received the message. For the first time in 10,000 years, they felt something they had almost forgotten existed. Fear. The humans were supposed to be dead. The humans were supposed to be nothing. But somehow, impossibly, they had risen from the ashes. And they were angry. The triumvirs gave their orders. A war fleet would be assembled, the largest fleet in 1,000 years. These humans would be crushed properly this time, ground into dust so fine that not even memory would survive. But as the war fleet gathered, as the hegemony prepared for battle, humanity was preparing too. In the asteroid belt, Dr. Webb completed his new engine design. In hidden bases across the outer solar system, new ships were being built. And in the hearts of every human survivor, a fire was burning that no Valdari weapon could extinguish. The Ember years were over. The war had begun. The Valdari war fleet arrived 3 months after humanity's first victory. 300 capital ships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack planets, emerged from faster-than-light travel near Jupiter. Behind them came thousands of smaller vessels, a swarm of destruction that blotted out the stars. Admiral Tanaka studied the enemy fleet from her command ship. 47 human vessels against 300 Valdari warships. The numbers were hopeless. Any sane commander would surrender. Any rational species would accept defeat. But humanity had not survived this long by being sane or rational. They had survived by being stubborn, by refusing to die when they were supposed to, by fighting when all hope was gone. "All ships," Tanaka said calmly. "Battle stations." The Valdari commander was called Sovereign Keth. He was ancient, even by Valdari standards, over 3,000 years old. He had crushed 100 rebellions across 1,000 worlds. These humans, these insects who had somehow survived their extermination, would be just another footnote in his long career. "Surround them," Keth ordered. "Standard formation. We will overwhelm them with superior numbers." It was the same tactic the Valdari had used for 10,000 years. It had always worked before. Kira Okonkwo sat in her fighter, waiting for the order to launch. Around her, hundreds of other pilots waited too, young men and women who had grown up in the shadow of extinction. They all knew the odds. They all knew they would probably die today. But they also knew something else. They knew that every second they fought, every ship they destroyed, was a second and a ship that couldn't hurt the colonies on Titan and Europa. They knew that even in death, they could buy time for humanity to survive. Remember, Kira said to her squadron, "We're not trying to win. We're trying to make them bleed." The battle began with a Voldari barrage that lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. Beams of energy and clouds of missiles streaked toward the human fleet. Tanaka watched them come and smiled. "Execute pattern Delta," she ordered. The human ships scattered like startled birds, moving in directions the Voldari computers had not predicted. They were fast, far faster than any vessel had a right to be, dancing through the storm of fire with impossible grace. Dr. Webb's new engines had changed everything. Kira led her squadron through a gap in the enemy formation, weaving between massive Voldari warships that tried and failed to track her. Her weapons found weak points that no one had exploited in millennia. Shield generators, engine housings, sensor arrays. Small targets, but critical ones. The Voldari fought the way they had always fought, in rigid formations with predictable tactics. Their ships were powerful but slow, designed for overwhelming force rather than flexibility. They expected their enemies to stand and fight, to meet strength with strength. Humanity did not cooperate. Tanaka's fleet struck and retreated, hit and ran, never staying in one place long enough for the Voldari to bring their full power to bear. They used asteroids for cover, Jupiter's moons for ambush points. They fought dirty, fought clever, fought like their lives depended on it, because their lives did depend on it. All of humanity depended on it. Hours passed. The Voldari lost ship after ship, picked apart by an enemy they couldn't pin down. Sovereign Keth grew increasingly frustrated. His perfect formation was in chaos. His communications were jammed. His officers were dying. Why won't they stand still? He demanded. Why won't they fight properly? His advisor, a younger Voldari named Vel, looked at the tactical display with something like wonder. "They're adapting," he said. "Every time we counter one of their tactics, they change to something new. I've never seen anything like it." "Impossible," Keth snapped. "No species adapts that quickly. The humans do." By the time the battle ended, the Voldari had lost 40 ships. Humanity had lost 19, nearly half their fleet. In pure numbers, it should have been a Voldari victory. But Sovereign Keth looked at his losses and felt something cold settle in his stomach. No one had destroyed 40 Voldari warships in 10,000 years. No one had even come close. And these were humans, a species that had been written off as extinct. If they could do this with 47 ships, what could they do with 100? 1,000? Keth ordered his fleet to withdraw. He told his superiors it was a strategic repositioning. But everyone knew the truth. The mighty Voldari had been fought to a standstill by a species they had tried to destroy. The Battle of Luna, as it came to be called, changed everything. On Titan, the human colonists celebrated in the streets. On Mars, hidden resistance cells emerged from bunkers and cheered. Across the solar system, humanity allowed itself to hope for the first time in 12 years. But for Tanaka and her officers, there was no time for celebration. They had won a battle, not a war. The Voldari would return with more ships, more weapons, more determination. Humanity needed something more than courage to survive. Dr. Webb provided that something. "It's finished," he announced, standing before a holographic display of his greatest creation. The new faster-than-light drive. It's 3 times faster than anything the Voldari have. With this, we can strike anywhere in the galaxy and be gone before they can respond. Tanaka studied the design. How soon can we build them? The first ships are already being fitted. We can have a strike force ready in 2 months. For the first time in years, Tanaka allowed herself to smile. Then let's show the hegemony what humans can do. Kira led the first deep space raid. Her squadron of 6 ships jumped across light years in seconds, appearing in a Valduri shipyard system without warning. The aliens had never imagined an attack so far from human space. Their defenses were minimal. Their response slowed out Kira and her pilots, destroyed 3 ships under construction and a fuel depot before the Valduri could organize a response. Then they were gone, vanishing into faster than light before a single weapon could touch them. Before she left, Kira broadcast a message on all frequencies. She wanted everyone to hear it. Every species in the hegemony, every slave world, every occupied planet. "We are humanity," she said. "You burned our world and left us for dead. You thought we would fade away like all the others. But we're still here. We remember what you did. And we're coming for you. Every world you hold, every ship you fly, every dream of empire you've ever had. We're going to tear it all down." She paused, letting her words sink in across the stars. "You should have killed us all when you had the chance." The message spread like fire through dry grass. Species that had accepted Valduri rule for millennia began to whisper among themselves. If humans could fight back, why couldn't they? If one small species could hurt the hegemony, what could many species do together? The Valduri triumvirs recognized the danger. They dispatched fleets to crush any hint of rebellion, to silence any voice that spoke of resistance. But they were fighting shadows now, chasing whispers, trying to hold back a tide that was already beginning to rise. In her small ship, jumping between stars, Kira Okonkwo thought about her family, about Lagos, about everything she had lost. The rage was still there, would always be there. But now there was something else too. Hope. Humanity had proven they could hurt the Valduri. Now they would prove they could break them. And when the hegemony fell, when the last Valduri warship burned in the void, Kira would finally be able to rest. But not yet. Not until the job was done. The war had only just begun. The Valduri had not always ruled alone. Beneath them, serving them, suffering under them, were a dozen species that had once been free. The Kreth, with their hard shells and compound eyes, who had built great cities before the Valduri burned them down. The Valesi, who swam through liquid methane oceans and remembered when their world had no masters. The Tarim, beings of living crystal who have forgotten more about engineering than most species would ever learn. For 50,000 years, these species had accepted their chains. The Valduri were too powerful to resist. Rebellion meant death, not just for individuals, but for entire worlds. Better to serve and survive than to fight and be destroyed. Then humanity proved that destruction was not inevitable. Admiral Tanaka understood something that the Valduri did not. A single species, no matter how determined, could not defeat an empire that spanned a galaxy. Humanity needed allies. They needed to turn the hegemony's greatest strength, its countless subject species, into its greatest weakness. She sent ambassadors across the stars, men and women who slipped past Valduri patrols to make contact with resistance movements on 100 worlds. The message they carried was simple. We don't want to rule you. We don't want to take the Valduri's place. We want to break the chains that bind us all. Join us, and together we'll build something better. Kira Okonkwo was one of those ambassadors. She traveled to Kreth Prime, a world of vast hive cities and endless deserts, where the insectoid Kreth had labored under Valduri rule for 30,000 years. She met with their hidden leaders in tunnels deep beneath the sand, where Valduri sensors could not reach. The Kreth Elder was ancient, her shell cracked and worn, her compound eyes clouded with age. She had seen 100 generations of her people born into slavery and die in slavery. She had long ago given up hope of anything different. "Why should we trust you?" she asked Kira. "Why should we believe humans are different from the Voldari?" Kira thought about the question for a long moment. She could have made promises, offered guarantees, spoken of shared enemies and common goals. But she chose to tell the truth instead. "We're not different," she admitted. "Humans can be cruel and selfish and stupid. We've hurt each other in terrible ways throughout our history. But we also know what it's like to lose everything. We know what it feels like when someone burns your world and leaves you to die." She met the elder's eyes. Human gaze meeting alien vision across the gap between species. "We don't ask you to trust us because we're good. We ask you to trust us because we've been where you are now. Because we understand. Because we're angry enough to fight and smart enough to win." The Kreth elder was silent for a long time. Then she made a sound that Kira's translator could not interpret, a clicking and buzzing that seemed to come from deep within her ancient body. "My people have forgotten how to fight," she said at last. "But we remember how to hate. Show us how to turn that hate into action, and we will stand with you." The Kreth Revolution began 2 months later. It was not a military uprising, because the Kreth had no military. It was something more subtle and more devastating. Every Kreth worker on 100 Valdari stations simply stopped working. Mining operations halted. Factories went silent. Ships sat in dock with no one to repair them. The Voldari response was swift and brutal. They killed thousands, tens of thousands, entire hive cities reduced to rubble. But for every Kreth they murdered, 10 more joined the resistance. And while the Valdari were busy crushing the Kreth rebellion, they were not watching their other subjects. The Valesi began sabotaging Voldari shipping. Fuel lines were cut. Navigation systems were corrupted. Ships vanished into the void, never to be seen again. The Voldari could not prove it was sabotage, could not identify the saboteurs, could not stop the steady erosion of their supply lines. The Tarim, masters of manufacturing, simply slowed down. Production quotas that had once been met with time to spare now took twice as long, 3 times as long. When the Valdari demanded explanations, the Tarim offered only confusion. They were working as hard as they could, they said. They did not understand why the machines were running so slowly, but the machines were not the problem. The Tarim were Dr. Webb made a discovery during this time that changed the nature of the war itself. He had continued studying Voldari biology, trying to understand how they lived so long. What he found was remarkable. "They're not naturally immortal," he explained to Tanaka and the other leaders. "They've been using technology to extend their lives. Technology they stole from a species they destroyed 30,000 years ago. Technology they don't understand and can't repair." "What does that mean?" Tanaka asked. "It means the triumvirs, the rulers of the hegemony, are dying. The systems that keep them alive are failing. They've been desperately searching for a solution for centuries, but they're running out of time." Kira smiled coldly. "So the masters of the galaxy are watching their own death approach and can't do anything to stop it." "Exactly. And desperation makes people do stupid things. Humanity offered the subject species something the Voldari never could: partnership. Human doctors worked with alien physicians to cure diseases that the Voldari had ignored. Human engineers taught innovation to species that had been forbidden from creating anything new. Human soldiers trained resistance fighters in tactics that could hurt an enemy that had seemed untouchable. Slowly, painfully, a coalition began to form. It was not easy. The species of the hegemony had been taught for millennia to hate and fear each other. Breaking through that conditioning took time and patience and countless small acts of trust, but it worked. The Declaration of Soul was signed in a hidden station orbiting a dead star. Representatives from humanity, the Kreth, the Velesi, the Turim, and 2 other species pressed their marks onto a document that promised freedom for all, or death for all. Admiral Tanaka stood before the assembled delegates, knowing that this moment would be remembered for as long as any of their species survived. "We come from different worlds," she said. "We breathe different air, eat different food, see the universe through different eyes. But we share one thing. We all know what it means to be crushed under someone else's boot. We all know what it feels like to be told that we are nothing, that our lives don't matter, that our dreams are forbidden." She looked at each delegate in turn. "Today we tell the Valdari that they were wrong. We matter, all of us. And we will not rest until every species in this galaxy can look at the stars and know that they are free." The Valdari triumvirs received word of the declaration with something approaching panic. An alliance against them was unprecedented. The subject species were supposed to be broken, obedient, incapable of unified action. This should not be possible, and yet it was. The hegemony began to fracture. Species that had accepted Valdari rule for millennia suddenly found the courage to resist. Trade routes collapsed. Military campaigns stalled. The mighty empire that had dominated the galaxy for 50,000 years was discovering, too late, that it had been built on a foundation of fear. Fear was no longer enough. In her ship, traveling between coalition worlds, Kira Okonkwo thought about how far they had come. 16 years ago, she had been a child walking to school in Lagos. Now she was a warrior fighting to reshape the galaxy. It still didn't seem real sometimes, but the faces of her family, the memory of fire falling from the sky, those were real. Those would always be real. She had made a promise on the day she was rescued. She had sworn that she would make the Valdari pay for what they had done. Now, with the coalition growing stronger every day, with the hegemony crumbling from within, she could finally see how that promise might be kept. The end was coming. Not just for the war, but for everything the Valdari had built over 50,000 years. And when it came, Kira would be there to watch it fall. 24 years had passed since the burning of Earth. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity, looking out at the largest fleet ever assembled. More than 1,000 ships from a dozen species hung in the darkness between stars, their running lights creating a constellation of defiance. Human cruisers flew beside Kreth hive ships. Velesi torpedo boats drifted alongside Turim manufacturing vessels. It was an impossible sight, a dream made real through blood and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to die. Tanaka was 77 years old now. Her body was tired, worn down by decades of war. But her mind was still sharp, and her heart still burned with the fire that had kept her fighting through the darkest years. Today, that fire would finally consume its fuel. Ahead of them lay Valder's Prime, the heart of the hegemony. A world of silver spires and ancient monuments where the triumvirs had ruled for 50,000 years. The Valdari had gathered every ship they could find to defend it. The final battle would be fought here, in the shadow of their greatest achievement. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her tactical officer announced. Tanaka nodded slowly. She thought about all the people who should have been here to see this. All the billions who had died on Earth. All the soldiers who had fallen in the years since. They were with her now, she felt, watching from whatever came after life. "Begin the attack," she said. Kira Okonkwo was 40 years old now, a fleet captain commanding her own squadron. She had spent more than half her life fighting this war, watching friends die, losing pieces of herself on battlefields scattered across the galaxy. But she had also found something in those years: purpose, family, hope. Her squadron led the first wave, diving toward the Valdari defensive line with weapons blazing. Behind her came ships crewed by species that had been enemies a generation ago, now fighting side by side against the true enemy that had oppressed them all. The Voldari fought with desperate fury. They knew what defeat would mean, not just for the triumvirs, but for everything they had built. Their ships were strong, their weapons powerful. But they were fighting alone, as they had always fought alone. While the coalition fought together, the battle raged for 3 days. Ships died in brilliant flashes of light. Entire squadrons were wiped out in seconds. But slowly, inexorably, the coalition pushed forward. The Voldari defensive line buckled, cracked, and finally shattered. Dr. Marcus Webb was aboard a science vessel near the rear of the fleet. He had spent 24 years preparing for this moment. His final creation was ready, a virus designed to target the stolen life extension technology that kept the triumvirs alive. It would not kill them quickly. It would make them mortal, let them experience the slow decay that every other species knew it was. He thought, a fitting punishment. "The device is ready," he reported to Tanaka. "Waiting for your order." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. She was about to end a civilization that had lasted 50,000 years. It was a terrible responsibility, the kind that weighed on a person's soul. But then she thought about Earth, about Lagos and Tokyo and New York, about the billions who had died screaming under Voldari fire, about the countless other species that had been crushed into oblivion long before humanity was born. "Deploy it," she said. The virus spread through Valderus Prime like wildfire. Within hours, the ancient triumvirs began to age. Skin that had been smooth for millennia wrinkled and sagged. Bodies that had been strong for longer than human history grew weak and frail. They died one by one, watching their empire collapse around them. Knowing that they were powerless to stop it, Kira led the squadron that broke through to the Voldari command station. She saw their last ships falling, their last defenses crumbling. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a vast, weary relief that it was finally ending. The Voldari surrender was accepted not by a human, but by a Kreth delegate named Shar. She stood where her ancestors had once knelt, her compound eyes reflecting the fires burning across the Voldari homeworld. "For 30,000 years, my people served you," she said to the defeated Voldari commander. "We built your ships. We grew your food. We died for your empire. No more. The hegemony is over. You will live as equals among the species you once ruled, or you will not live at all." The commander had no response. What could he say? His civilization was ash. His rulers were dead. Everything the Voldari had built over 50 millennia had been torn down by the species they had dismissed as insects. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something more important. They had broken the chains that had bound it for 50,000 years. Every species was free now, free to make their own choices, free to build their own futures, free to reach for the stars without asking permission from anyone. The war was over. 1 year later, Tanaka retired to a small house overlooking the bay where New Tokyo was being built. Earth was recovering slowly, life returning to places that had been dead for a quarter century. She spent her days gardening and watching the ships come and go in the sky above, carrying people and goods between 100 worlds. Sometimes old comrades visited her. They would sit together and talk about the war, about friends lost and battles won, about the future they had fought so hard to create. Tanaka was at peace. She had done what she set out to do. The rest was up to the younger generations. Dr. Webb continued his research, but now he worked with scientists from 20 species. They shared knowledge freely, learning from each other, building on each other's discoveries. In the first year after the war, they made more scientific progress than the Voldari had made in 10,000. That, more than anything else, showed what freedom could accomplish. Kira stood on the bridge of humanity's first true exploration vessel, a ship designed not for war but for discovery. Behind her lay the space that the hegemony had once controlled. Ahead lay the unknown vast reaches of the galaxy that no one had ever explored. She thought about her parents sometimes, about her little brother, about the girl she had been walking to school on that morning so long ago. She wished they could see what she had become, what humanity had become. She liked to think they would be proud. A Valdari historian visited her before she departed. He was young by their standards, barely 200 years old. He was writing a history of the war, trying to understand how the impossible had happened, how a species marked for extinction had risen to reshape the galaxy. What made humans different? He asked her, "Why did you succeed when every other species failed?" Kira thought about the question for a long time. There were many answers she could give. Human adaptability, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. But in the end, she gave a simpler answer. "You burned our world and expected us to die," she said. "But humans have always been good at surviving. We've survived ice ages and plagues and wars against each other. We've survived everything the universe has thrown at us for 200,000 years." She looked out at the stars, at the infinite darkness that waited to be explored. And we never, ever forget. The exploration vessel jumped to faster than light, carrying Kira and her crew toward the unknown. Behind them, the galaxy they had helped to free began the long work of healing. Species that had been enemies for millennia learned to be neighbors. Worlds that had been crushed under Valdari rule began to bloom again. It was not a perfect peace. There were conflicts and struggles, old hatreds that would take generations to fade. But it was a beginning, a chance for something better than what had come before. The Valdari had believed that the universe was a garden to be controlled. They had been wrong. The universe was wild and free and full of wonder, and it belonged to everyone who had the courage to reach for it. Humanity had risen from the ashes of their destroyed world. They had conquered not by force, but by inspiring others to fight alongside them. And now they were reaching for new stars, new worlds, new possibilities. The story was not over. It would never be over. But the chapter written in fire and blood and tears had finally come to an end. And in the end, the stars remembered what humanity had done. They remembered the species that had refused to die, that had turned tragedy into triumph, that had broken the chains of a 50,000-year empire. They remembered, and they would remember forever.